In 1 Samuel, verses 6 through 18. Let's see. It says, "So it was when they came that he looked at Eliab and said, Surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said to Samuel, Do not look at his appearance or the physical stature, because I have refused him. For the Lord does not see as man sees. For man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart." So Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel, and he said, Neither has the Lord chose this one. Then Jesse, and I might murder this name. Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, Neither has the Lord chosen this one. Thus Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. And Samuel said to Jesse, The Lord has not chosen these. And Samuel said to Jesse, Are all the young men here? Then he said, There remains yet the youngest, and there he is, keeping the sheep. And Samuel said to Jesse, Send and bring him, for we will not sit down till he comes here. So he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and with bright eyes and good looking, and the Lord said, Arise, anoint him, for this is the one. Then Samuel took the horn of oil, and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel arose and went to Ramah. But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a distressing spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servant said to him, Surely a distressing spirit from God is troubling you. Verse 16 says, Let our master now command your servants who are before you to seek out a man who is a skillful player on the harp. And it shall be that he will play with his hand when the distressing spirit from God is upon you, and you shall be well. So Saul said to his servants, Provide me now a man who can play well, and bring him to me. Then one of the servants answered and said, Look, I have seen a son of Jesse, the Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a mighty man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a handsome person, and the Lord is with him. So, I know that was a lot to read this morning, but I wanted to really fit in the whole story of David here, or the beginning of the story of David here. Now, you see, many people say that David was around the age of 12 to 13 years old. He was young. He was a good-looking young boy. But you see, go ahead and get my little remote out here. Saul was marked first. You see, Saul was a man chosen by God to lead the people of Israel. The people of Israel said, Look, we want a king. We want somebody that will actually be here and lead us. We don't want to be led by prophets or by a God that we can't see. So God let the Israelites have what they wanted. He let them have a king, and his name was Saul. And you see, we usually talk bad about Saul because he trampled on the anointing of God, lost the anointing of God, and became a crazed man that was set out to kill David. And that's usually how we look at him. But we don't look at the fact that he was chosen by God to lead the people of Israel. He was chosen. He was God's servant. But he started doing things his own way. And in the end, he became that crazy man that we talk about that was dead set on killing David. But you see, he still had the title, but ultimately he lost the favor of God. And you see, that's where we pick up here. Saul has lost the favor of God. He has he went to dominate a people that God has sent them to kill. He said, kill everything. Don't keep nothing for yourselves. Kill everything. And ultimately, he disobeyed God. They kept some of the livestock, and I think they ended up keeping the king alive, and so on and so forth. But ultimately, he disobeyed God, and he lost the anointing of God. And so Samuel set out to find the next king of Israel. But you see, ultimately, Saul was still king. Saul was still in the position, but he had lost the anointing. And so we pick up in verse, let's see. We pick up in verse 12. And it says, so he sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy with bright eyes and good looking. And the Lord said, arise and anoint him, for this is the one. You see, the Lord told Samuel, arise, anoint him. Basically, this is who we're looking for. Mark him as the future king of Israel. This is who we want. Now you see, God's still marking his servants. I don't know if y'all know this, but we are God's chosen people. God chose all of us, but it's up to us to choose him. And you see, God's still marking his servants. We are God's chosen people, and it's up to us to accept the mark of God. So verse 13 says, and Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. You see, he took and he anointed, they poured it over their forehead, and it came down and anointed the future king. So, in the midst of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel arose and went to Ramah. So, David is now anointed king. He is king, but he hasn't taken the position yet. Now you see, there's a reason to that. We're not going to get completely into that story, but you see, David, he had the anointing. The position was his. But you see, it wasn't God's time yet. It wouldn't be till I think like 30 years later when he actually took the throne of Israel and became king. And you see, I don't know how I would fare with that. If I was king, I would want to be king right then. This is my position. You're just going to have to get out and move. But you see, it wasn't God's time. So we look at that and we see David is standing there waiting, but he wasn't doing it. No, he wasn't doing nothing. And here comes Brother Terry's favorite thing. Whoops. If you don't know what to do what you know. And you see, this is where we are in the church now. We know we have a calling. We know we have ultimately a position that we are going to take. And you see, so many times we say, okay, I know what I want to do. I know what God has called me to do. So I'm going to sit and I'm going to wait for that position to open. And then ultimately I'm going to take that position. And then that's what I'm going to do. But until then, I'm not doing anything. But you see, that's why our churches are in the position that we're in now. Because we have servants of God that are waiting and doing nothing. So you see, in your waiting, you still have a job. In your waiting for God to ultimately fulfill your purpose, you still have a job. It might not be the job that we want. Let's face it, we all go to a job every day that we don't want to go to. Why not do the same for God? Why not ultimately work in the church even though it's not necessarily the job that you want to do? So, we're all called to do something, but don't do nothing. And I know that is not proper English. And I was talking to Cece over the week, and I said, I was sitting there, or no, I was talking to my sister over the weekend, and I said, I know that's not proper English. What is the proper phrase there? Me and her, neither one knew. So you're stuck with "don't do nothing." But it has a nice ring. Don't do nothing. Don't come to church just to come to church. Don't come to church and just fill a spot in a pew. We as Christians are called to so much more, and I know every time I get up here I harp on this, but there's a reason. We as Christians are called to so much more than to just come to church and go home. We're called to so much more than to just live our life and not have an impact. We may never see the impact that we have on this earth. We may never see the life that we touch as we go through life. But we have a job. So as we go through life, work while you wait. You see, David, he knew what he was supposed to do. He knew one day he would be king of a great nation and do all these things, and ultimately his son would eventually build the temple of Israel. But he was still a shepherd. I want to focus on that real quick. He was a king. He was anointed king. But ultimately, he was still a shepherd. You see, nothing was too small for him to do. But God was preparing him to be king in the small things. You see, God was preparing David ultimately to be Saul's armor bearer while he was still in the field. So, we are marked as a church. I believe God has placed this church here for an absolute purpose. And He's placed each and every one of us in this church for a purpose. We are marked as a church. We have the Spirit of God. We have the power of God. When we have the people of God. It's time for us to use what we have. You see, we have all these things, but we also have a world dying and going to hell every day. We have a community around us dying and going to hell every day. And you see, we have a job. We have the place. And this is the time. Writing that down, I began to think about, everything it took to get this church here. It took a lot of people hurting to get this church here. It took so much for the people that we have in here that we went through to get this church here. I'll never forget the day, the very first day that we walked into Brother Terry's house to have church there. And I came a little bit after. It took us a little bit to leave where we were and to come to terms with basically what we had lost there, because we had such a family where we were. And we ended up going to church with my mom for a little bit, and then we decided, after we found out that Brother Terry was having church at his house, we went over to his house, and we walked through those doors, and as soon as you walk through those doors, you could feel the love of what we had. You could feel God's Spirit in that place. But church, let's not forget where we came from. Let's not forget why we're here. You see, we have a purpose. And there's a reason why we went through the things that we went through as a church, and why we went through the things that we went through as individual people to end up here. Me and Carrie were up here one day this week, and me and him just began to talk, and I said, there's a reason why the people that are here are here. You see, we all have individual jobs that we do that make this church work. But also, as a group of people, there's no telling what we can do. There's no telling who we can reach. We have all the way from welders and tire people in here to the representative for our area. And you see, there's no telling what we can do as a body of believers. I go back to the last sermon that we did, and we talked about being a body, and how that no one member can work by themselves. It takes muscles in my arm to move my finger. It takes muscles all the way up in my back to move my leg. You see, as a church, we have to work together to complete what we're looking to complete. So, that was just a ADHD rabbit trail. So, I don't know if I have another slide after this one. Nope. That's altar call. So, done lost my spot. Verse 17 says, or verse 14 says, "But the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a distressing spirit came from the Lord, and troubled him." Verse 15 says, And Saul's servant said to him, "Surely a distressing spirit from God is troubling you. Let our master now command your servants, who are before you, to seek out a man who is a skillful player in the harp, and it shall be that he will play it with his hand when the distressing spirit from God is upon you, and you shall be well." So Saul said to his servants, "Provide me now a man who can play well, and bring him to me." And verse 18 says, Then one of his servants answered and said, "Look, I have seen the son of Jesse." You see, as we work as individuals in the church, as we live our life and go throughout life as a Christian from this church, people see us. But you see, back when I was a youth leader at another church, I asked those kids there, I said, if you couldn't speak and you couldn't write anything down, all you could do is live your life as a person, what would they see in you? What would everybody around you see in you? Would they see that you're a Christian and you hold yourself as a Christian?